To promote my new flower shop, I had one place print my business cards, another print my brochures, and a third, my signs. Now my roses aren't red, my violets aren't blue, my geraniums look dead, and I don't know what to do.
Staples can help your business stand out with signs, banners, and brochures that are a true reflection of your company. And now at Staples, spend $50 or more on print and marketing services and get $5 off your next in-store purchase.
Now my business is blossoming, and I'm spending less green.
Exclusions apply. In-store only. Ends 6/23/18.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
To Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York with your host and moderator this evening, Bishop Larry Gators. Call us in right now, 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, you can call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, that's 1-929-477-3997. We are nationally syndicated through the Talk America Radio Network out of Dallas, Texas. Now, beloved, the Talk America Radio Network is indeed the new dominant force in conservative talk radio. And we are also ever so blessed to be a part of the world-renowned iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group here in New York City, New York, 929-477-3997. Now, we have access to at least 300 million people around the world in 150 markets. Again, 929-477-3997. We are very excited tonight to have back with us world-renowned global forensic economist with the Able Danger Corporation. Organization there out of Wisconsin, the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins of Able Danger, and he is, again, a world-class global forensic economist with Able Danger. His main concentration is on forensic economics for disaster analysis in virtual reality prototyping. This man is a man for this hour. And David, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Bishop.
Even now, in
Oh, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, you can also send in your questions via email, beginning right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, that's Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. And also, Mr. Hawkins graduated first-class honors degree from the world-renowned Cambridge University there in the UK in mechanical engineering. He has a diploma in industrial management, also from Cambridge University, the Foundational Scholarship from Queen's College there at Cambridge University. I'm telling you, this man is outstanding, is an outstanding academician, performing in applied mathematics and thermodynamics. We are, again, so excited to have this great man of God back with us, and we're going to get into part 6 of the greatest conspiracy ever told. Again, part 6 of the greatest conspiracy ever told, here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Let's delve into the Kelly brief for 289, networking, intercommunity equity, Rothschild's North Tower horsemen, circles, AWACS, and Con Air SWAT. What have you in Able Danger have learned so far concerning this networking, intercommunity equity, Rothschild's North Tower horsemen? Laid the foundation for us right now, David, so that we can understand the foreground of what's going on, not just in the insurance corporation here in America, because I really want to touch on this dead peasants insurance scheme that not just Walmart has been perpetuating on their employees for decades, but for many other companies that are controlled by Circle through the Rothschilds. I kind of laid the foundation for us in this brief 289 sent to General John Kelly.
Well, thank you, Bishop. And I just was listening to the preamble to your show, and there's that very meaningful voice talking about the Matrix. And towards the end of that potted version, it said something to the effect that we'll give you the red pill and show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I like that phrase, because I think that's what Able Danger is doing. We're digging into the rabbit hole, and we're finding the field is full of rabbit holes, but they all lead to the same destination and the same perpetrator, which is very exciting. And you probably remember from the last show, I spent a lot of time talking about the capture of the American Patent Office by Serco. Mm-hmm. And in fact, probably back in the Clinton administration, the cronies of the Clintons outsourced some key government functions to this British company Serco, including the National Visa Center in 1994, which allowed the Serco to bring in the Al-Qaeda or the Bin Laden sleeper cells into the United States and conceal them in plain view in some interesting places, including the Small Business Administration. They have outsourced, the operation of the Defense Ammunition Center to this British company, Serco. And since we last had a conversation, I've been very excited to find that the British invented the so-called dum-dum bullet in the 1890s. And I think they had about a stock of 60 million at the end of the 19th century to control the restlessness in the colonies, and I'm being a little bit facetious here. And apparently the dum-dum bullet was designed because they found that if the British forces were being attacked by people with sufficient hardiness and spiritual energy, they could take 6 of those small full metal jacket bullets and reach the British forces and then cut a few heads off, you see. So the British invented the dum-dum bullet. I think it was used for big game, but the idea of the dum-dum bullet is it breaks up on entry into the body, and almost the entire kinetic energy from the bullet is transferred into the body. And that's another subject, but I'll talk about the strong probability, because of the lack of the exit hole, that JFK was shot by a modified dum-dum bullet for the final shot that killed him. And
Yes.
then we come to this extraordinary notion that the American administration, primarily under Clinton and his crony wife, Hillary Clinton, actually decided to outsource the patent office. Now, actually, what we discovered, of course, is the United States Patent Office has probably been operated under British control since 1802. And the first superintendent of the Patent Office was Dr. William Thornton, who designed the Capitol building. And he was an Anglo-American, born in Jamaica, I believe. And he wasn't quite, if that's the right word, kosher, because in 1811, a man called James Hall invented a rifle, and the superintendent of the Patent Office, Dr. William Thornton, said, "It's already been invented. However, if you add my name to the patent, I'll issue the patent for you." So there's already an indication back in 1811, which is an interesting year because that was the year that N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited was formed in London. And I believe we can now prove that N.M. Rothschild has exerted significant control over the United States Patent and Trademark Office right through to the present, including the weaponized devices that were used in the 9/11 attack. Over to you.
And again, this dum-dum bullet, it's amazing to what end the deep state and this global Luciferian Illuminati system will do. And you just said something that I never knew before about how the deep state creates such a weapon, such as these dum-dum bullets. Now, my next question in connection to these type of weaponry that the deep state uses, David, do they design munitions or certain types of bullets to target a certain ethnic group?
Yes.
What say you about that?
Yes, absolutely. So if we take the dum-dum bullet, which was fragmented and basically a system to transfer energy, and we take the idea that the British now control the American Patent Office, what I've been doing is whenever there's an interesting crime, and by interesting I mean not one of domestic violence, but very obviously requiring military-grade communications and coordination, what I try to look at is if the signature of the crime scene is consistent with the description of the patent that might have been used, because where we're coming from with this idea of an injured community equity is if we can demonstrate that communities were injured in the 9/11 attack as a result of the negligent or reckless or willful use of a patented device, then those communities have a claim under law or for wrongful death. So now, quite recently, you probably heard that there was an attack on Mr. Skripal and his daughter in a little town called Salisbury in the United Kingdom, and they attribute that to Novichok, which is a nerve agent. So, consistent with my analysis, what I do is I Google for Novichok and patents. Now, what the British and the Americans are saying is that Novichok was essentially developed by the Russians, and therefore there's evidence that the Russians shot or killed this guy. Well, they didn't kill him, but shoot him, and he went into a sort of catatonic state. Incidentally, Bishop, Mr. Skripal and his daughter are both recovered, but Novichok is supposed to be a fatal nerve agent. So I'm quite sure he wasn't shot by a nerve agent. However, what I did find is there are a number of stocks of Novichok around the world, including at Northwestern University in Chicago, which was where Bernadine Dawn, the leader of the Weather Underground organization, that's where she gave her lectures or seminars on, amongst others, torture paradigms and practice. So as ye sow, so shall ye reap. Because that woman wasn't arrested and locked up and probably executed, she is now home free. She's a leading light in the left-wing community, and it's highly likely that she influenced the development of a detoxification system for Novichok at Northwestern University, because that would have given her colleagues in the Weather Underground and like-minded people access to stocks of Novichok, which are essentially or potentially weapons of mass destruction. Right? Now, all you need to do is develop what they call, and this is, in one sense, it's black comedy, Bishop. They've developed a biological bullet, right, into which you potentially could put what you just mentioned, an ethically appropriate biological agent that would kill, and I'm not sure they're there right now, people based on their DNA. So you could conceivably have blacks or browns or yellows or whites. And my point is, they don't care whether you're black or brown or yellow or white. What they do care, and they're very interested in, is developing a portfolio of weapons that can intimidate one group, and then another group can be blamed. So it's the classic British technique of divide and rule. So now, this particular filling of the biological bullet, so they're basically hollow rounds of ammunition. Are you aware of how many rounds of hollow nose ammunition that could potentially be used for a biological attack on the population inside the United States? Do you know how many rounds of hollow nose ammunition was procured by the Department of Homeland Security over a couple of years ago?
I would like to hear. I would like to find out that stat because right now you're blowing our minds. Go right ahead, David.
Okay, it's 1.4 billion. Now, these bullets have actually been, or potentially they could be modified, so one scratch will kill you. And the argument going back to the British in the late 1890s, and this was the subject of the Hague Convention banning hollow nose bullets, is much more efficient if you can shoot someone with one bullet as opposed to 6 full jacket and kill them, because inside the bullet you've got Novichok or anthrax or ricin or some other foul substance that has a nearly instantaneous effect on the targeted individual, or worse, allows you, and this may be very difficult for your listeners to get their heads around, allows you to place a bet on how long that individual will take to die.
Wow.
And the individual who...
David. Go right ahead.
Well, let me talk about the scene of the most horrendous serial killings up in British Columbia, which I believe the guests were flown up by Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, and her United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, nicknamed Conair, right? Now, what that means is this woman who developed Conair with the purchase of a Boeing 727 for the Marshals Prisoner Transportation System in 1985. I think that's when she founded Conair. At that time, she was senior counsel for the United States Marshal Service, and what she got, and I believe she paid for that, was with money stolen from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund. She financed Conair with money confiscated from suspected crime groups. That is to say, Bishop, if you were driving around New York with your Lamborghini and they decided that your program didn't generate the kinds of funds that would legitimize the purchase of a Lamborghini, they could confiscate your Lamborghini and say, you have to sue us.
Right.
Get your Lamborghini back. Well, a lot of mafia people, they would rather not take on the government. They'd rather give them the Lamborghini and go and buy a Ferrari with the proceeds of the drug trade, if you get my drift. So what Christine Marcy appears to have been doing is flying up guests to a pig farm in British Columbia, known as the Picton Family Pig Farm, and attending raves. Now, think about this. Between 1983 and 2002, they reckon up to 100 First Nations prostitutes were killed out at the pig farm. They didn't find all the body bits because they were being fed to pigs or put into the food chain, but they found 6 bodies with enough evidence for the Crown up in British Columbia to claim that all of these women were being shot by bullets. And so I start wondering, well, if they have 1,700 people at raves on a Friday night, and a fridge full of body parts, and a wood chipper, and a 600-pound boar running around outside, what are they doing? Well, one of the things they appear to be doing was having cannibal feasts. Another thing they were apparently doing is filming these rituals or ceremonies and selling them as live snuff films through an outfit called StarNet Communications into 4-star or 5-star hotels where guests could watch in a pay-per-view mode. And if those bullets were, for example, one of those biological bullets, let's say containing a hallucinogen or a anticoagulant or a nerve agent, these women could have been shot up on the stage and they could have been taking bets on how long it would take for the woman to die. That's called death betting.
Oh my goodness. Man, this is amazing. And I just read something on today, Brother David, concerning the death of a multi-millionaire designer by the name of Kate Spade. And all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, if you get a chance to read about this so-called suicide, just go to BangerDailyNews.com, again, BangerDailyNews.com, and she recently, about a month and a half ago, canceled her contract with Walmart. Walmart was making millions and millions of dollars off of her designer handbags, but she got out of her working contract with Walmart because she found out that the money that was supposed to be going to her, there was a certain percentage going into subsidizing this dead peasant insurance fraud scam. And she got out of that because she no longer wanted her brand nor her name. But we'll get into that later on. And so her name is Kate Spade, and she was about to expose Walmart. And not saying that Walmart had anything to do with her death, but even her family is saying that her suicide is suspect because today the stock market concerning her company, Tapestry Incorporated, has jumped up to $44.76 per stock. And this is interesting. Go right ahead, David.
Yes, so I was just talking about, and actually I'm going to come to what's known as dead peasant life insurance in a minute in respect of the North Tower. But I'll just stay with this issue with the pig farm because I have coined the phrase, somewhat tentatively, that on 911 from the 47th floor of the North Tower, that's WTC1, where there was a meeting with shareholders of Serco that I believe was hosted by Serco's investment banker, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, which incidentally is the investment banker for President Donald Trump and Queen Elizabeth II, which is quite an interesting combination. But I believe on the 47th floor, they released the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse on 911. Now, so obviously I'm using something of a metaphor here. I've tried to classify because people get very confused when talking about patents. I happen to have filed a patent application back in the 1980s, so I know something about this. But people get very confused because patent language is very complex, very precise, but from my point of view, it's very forensic because it doesn't talk about race, color, or creed, although it might imply that. For example, if they invent a bullet that can be tailored for to eliminate certain kinds of color or certain kinds of creed, but that's in the future. So my 4 families for the 4 horsemen are Boeing, Conair, Lutnick, and Dum Dum. And let me just explain, Bishop, why I've picked those 4. Boeing is almost self-explanatory. Obviously, it's a company that's been around 100 years. It's got a vast portfolio of patents. But there are certain patents that interest me greatly because they were used on 911 to kill a large number of primarily American citizens. Now, the most important patent that I've discovered over the last 72 hours, I guess, is you may remember that on 9/11 there were simulated war games going on, right, between actually Canada and the United States, where Canada was playing the red team role and attacking the United States as it had done for about twice a year since 1947. And the idea of the war games is to test the ability of the Americans to defend themselves against a surprise attack. So what happens with those, you have ground-based radar systems and command systems, and you have airborne. Actually, they're called AWACS. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
It's Airborne Warning and Control System. And these are these planes, they're Boeing planes with the radomes, the rotating radomes on the top. And they're looking down on the battlefield, and they're instructing various assets to go in and defend whoever has custody of the Boeing aircraft. Unfortunately for the United States of America, it would appear that these AWACS systems, and there's about 68 of them flying around the world, in the Royal Saudi Arabian Air Force, the Royal Air Force, the French Air Force, and NATO, unfortunately it appears that these airborne warning and control systems have been backdoored by the enemy of the United States. And so the name of the patent is Interactive Training System for AWACS Weapons Directors. And unfortunately for the United States on 9/11, these systems can be switched from training mode to simulation to live fire. So on 9/11, I think our conclusion is that 98% of the people playing those war games thought they were in simulation mode, but 2%, let's say, knew that they could backdoor the simulation and switch to live fire. That is to say, they could take some aircraft that were participating in the simulation and switch the pilot out, right, and the autopilot in, and fly those aircraft into their targets. And send the fighter interceptors in the wrong direction. And that's what happened. There was never any low-time Muslim pilot flying those planes through the maneuvers that they executed on 9/11 because those maneuvers were aerobatic. A fighter pilot could not have moved those large passenger jets through those maneuvers. And in fact, what we believe is that the large passenger jets were masking radar instruments to hide a drone in the radar shadow of the large decoy passenger jets, and the decoy passenger jets went over their target out into the Atlantic into a drop zone.
Wow.
And the drones then executed the attack.
Yeah. Then we, I believe a couple of months ago, David, and not to cut you off, I really want us to stay on this 9/11 thing because it seems like we are every single month unlayering what really happened on that fateful day. Christopher Hyman, and if you can reveal to our listening audience all over the world, who is Christopher Hyman? What is his connection to Circle? And just give us kind of a bird's eye view of what happened, why he left that meeting in the North Tower, and for what reason.
Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Bishop. He was at that time the chief executive officer of Serco. He was at a breakfast meeting in the Windows on the World restaurant at the top of the North Tower. And around 8:30, we believe, he left the Windows on the World restaurant and went down in a high-speed elevator to the 47th floor to meet with shareholders. Now, remember that the investment banker for Serco is N.M. Rothschild. I believe that we will prove through these class action suits that the host for that meeting was Wilbur Ross, who is now the Commerce Secretary for Donald Trump. But back then, he was, let's say, 2001, he was a significant way through his career with N.M. Rothschild. Now, this really is a horror story for America because, and possibly for Donald Trump, because in 1990, as I understand it, the family holdings of the Trump foundation or organization, they were $4 billion in the hole. They were in debt. And there was a finite chance the Trump organization would shut down. But the cartel of lenders, advised, I believe, by N.M. Rothschild, must have said to the Trump, look, we're not going to shut you down, but we're going to make some arrangements where you can pay us back at a later date. Yes. And of course, one way of paying him back is to make him the President of the United States, which is not to say that I don't really know whether Donald Trump is a good guy or a bad guy. What I will say is he would have been a target very early on for entrapment, blackmail, and extortion by the mob in New York. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that you build hotels and casinos in New York and New Jersey without doing a deal with the mob, right?
Right.
So now, what was Chris Hyman doing? So everyone that he left in the Windows on the World restaurant breakfast meeting were killed because no one survived above the point of impact. But he goes down to the 47th floor and has a meeting with the shareholders, and I believe N.M. Rothschild, the investment banker, and I think they were betting on a number of things, including a dead peasant life insurance policy.
Wow.
Now, let me give an example where that might apply. Remember that you have Cantor Fitzgerald on the top of the North Tower, and another chief executive officer, actually of Cantor Fitzgerald, by the name of Howard Lutnick, had invented a wireless wagering system and applied and been granted a patent. That is to say, he could be wagering, or the people who are using that patent could have been wagering on the number of dead in Cantor Fitzgerald after the 9/11 attack. And I believe that's exactly what they were doing. And I believe that the insurance company that had written what is known as a corporate-owned life insurance for Cantor Fitzgerald, that company's name is AXA Equitable. And AXA Equitable is a shareholder in Serco, so it would have had a representative on the 47th floor, and it's also the co-developer of the Trump Tower.
Wow.
So it's very likely that on 9/11, the people who organized the attack on the United States said to Donald Trump or his agents, Donald, we got a difficult decision to make. We're about to attack the North Tower, and we want to decide on what the next target is, because we want to take out 2 towers in New York. And they could have said, I'm just speculating, Bishop, they could have said to Donald Trump, how about we take out the Trump Tower? What would Donald Trump's reaction have been? He might initially have said, you can't do that, and then he sees someone flying into the North Tower, right? Wow. We then have General Alexander Haig being interviewed by, I don't know, Fox or CNN at 9 o'clock on the morning of 9/11, 2 minutes before the second plane hits the south face of the South Tower. And Alexander Haig is asked, well, who do you think is behind it? So the camera is trained on the north face of the North Tower, and you've got this nice, persuasive and convincing silhouette of an aircraft that's flown into it. It's actually disappeared into the building, which is something of a problem for these clowns, because a passenger jet, which is basically aluminum, plastic, and bodies with a couple of titanium engines, doesn't normally fly through a building with 200,000 tons of structural steel and come out the other side. It should have bounced out into the street, but it didn't. So what I think we have there is a clear example of a drone that has been guided into the building using Boeing AWACS technology, right? Where the building has actually been painted with explosives, so it looks like a plane hit it, and the propaganda machine is kicked in because when General Alexander Haig said, who do you think is behind it? Now remember, this is 14 minutes after first impact. He says, well, I don't want to speculate, and then he proceeds to. He says, we know where to look. It's either the Palestinian or bin Laden groups. So there's a bit of forensic research for you. Within 14 minutes of the attack that would ultimately translate into the attempted overthrow of the American government, you've got the former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe saying that we have to look at the Palestinians or the bin Laden group, which is interesting because on June the 1st to the 2nd of 2001, there was a full dress rehearsal for 911 with a picture of Osama bin Laden on the front page.
Wow. You know, and you hit a nerve with me, David. I'm so excited that you're back on the air tonight. We have with us Mr. David Hawkins, global forensic economist, all the way from Vancouver, British Columbia, one of the most powerful individuals that I have ever interviewed in 25 years of radio here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, 929-477-3997. Where does the Teachers Union come into play concerning 9/11, the North Tower, the Teachers Union? Is there any connection with Circle, Chris Hyman, but specifically the Teachers Union or the Teachers Benefits?
Oh, excellent question. The full name was the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association College Retirement Equity Fund. And this lends itself to David Rockefeller's statement that the world is ready to move to a supranational government of international bankers and an intellectual elite. And with no offense to you or to me, Bishop, I don't think they consider you a member of the intellectual elite. I don't think they consider me a member of the intellectual elite. But they do consider Barack Obama and Michelle Obama members of the intellectual elite because they were teaching. Michelle Obama indirectly, I think she was earning $350,000 a year as communications director of the University of Chicago teaching hospitals. But I think that put her in faculty mode. But our friend Barack Hussein Obama was teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago, so he was on faculty. And of course, the Clintons taught at the Jesuit University of, I believe, Georgetown.
Yes, sir.
So those two grifters, I hope I'm not being unkind. Maybe I don't mind being unkind. They occupied the White House for a while, and then the Obamas, and I think they would be seen very much by the community of international bankers as very pliable and malleable, not very brave, low integrity members of the intellectual elite who will do anything to be considered or advised on how elite they are by their cronies. Right? Now, the intellectual elite associated with the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, that I believe is the largest private pension fund in the world. It also happens to be a major shareholder in Boeing. The flip side in the United Kingdom is what's known as the superannuation, the university superannuation scheme, which again would be populated by people who consider themselves to be members of the intellectual elite. They're also shareholders in Serco. So on the morning of 9/11, meeting on the 47th floor, you had 10 banks that are described as the global custodians, including BNY Mellon, with $100 trillion of assets under management. You have two pension funds representing the intellectual elite. And I suggest, Bishop, that is the deep state, right?
Yes.
And there are three sovereign countries or sovereign states that are members of the shareholder group of Serco. One is the United Kingdom. The other is the Saudi Arabian government. And the third is Singapore. So you had all the ingredients, I believe, for a deep state armed with various patented devices to unleash the four horsemen of the apocalypse at precisely 8:46 a.m. on the morning of 9/11, when it would appear that a hardened penetrator bomb invented by Lockheed Martin sliced through Tower Number 1 and came out the other side. And you can look at the videos and you can see it played down slowly. You've got a plane allegedly hitting the north face of the North Tower, and out the other side pops a missile.
Wow. Man, this is, again, you are blowing our minds tonight, again, Mr. Hawkins, here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, 929-477-3997, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Continue to send in your questions. They're coming in by the hundreds. Please continue to send in your questions. Thank you. We got brand new Global Spiritual Revolution partners who are listening right now out of Marseille, France, including Paris, France. Thank you so much for joining the international movement of Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. And last but never least, we also have brand new Global Spiritual Revolution partners out of Sheffield, England. Thank you for listening to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. So the teacher's pension, I did not know that they had stock in Boeing. And so this, I want not to get away from 9/11, but this DNA, I had heard a professor say this a few years ago at a lecture in Toronto, Canada, that the only intelligence agency on Earth that can manipulate DNA is the Mossad. Is it possible, not to get away from what we're talking about tonight concerning the greatest story, the greatest conspiracy ever told, networking, injured community, equity in the Rothschilds, North Tower Horsemen, the Four Horsemen, Kernan Circles, AWACS, Con Air, SWAT team. Is it possible, David, for DNA to be manipulated? Because if it is, that's a very dangerous concept. Over to you.
Well, I think that what we're talking about here is gene therapy, which obviously can be used for positive purposes, because by replacing or repairing some of these genes, you can fix, fibrositis and et cetera, et cetera. So with all of these technologies or patents, they're capable of dual use, right? Now, I go back in history now. I've got in the habit of going back through the custody of the patent chains that might explain the release of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse on 9/11, which, just to remind folks, is, I believe, the generic name is Boeing, Con Air, Lutnick, and Dum Dum. And I look at people who had, for example, custody of the refinements to the Dum Dum bullet that was originally put into production for military purposes by the British in India at their Dum Dum factory, and hence the name for the bullet. Now, what happened somewhere along the lines is people said, well, maybe we can take or create a hollow space inside the Dum Dum bullet and fill it with something that can be used preferentially to take out whoever we think are our enemies. Now, what you'd need to do there is you'd need to find a scientist who's very familiar with chemistry and biology and explosives to, if you will, grandfather or manage those developments of the Dum Dum bullet. And it's no coincidence in the Second World War, the advisor to Winston Churchill and his Churchill's toy shop that appears to have taken over the orchestration or manipulation of the patent office to produce biological bullets was none other than the late Victor Rothschild, who was the former chairman of the British or United Kingdom Gaming Commission and of N.M. Rothschild and Sons that was founded in 1811. Now, Victor Rothschild is considered by a lot of people to have been the fifth man in the Cambridge spy ring. He loaned his apartment in London to Anthony Blunt and Guy Burgess, who were a couple of, it would appear, pedophile homosexuals. And these two or three people used pedophile entrapment as one of the many means of getting agents to betray their country, like Russia. And I'm not saying that Mr. Skripal is a pedophile. What I am saying is he was a double agent for the British who spied in Russia. He came to the United Kingdom as part of the spy exchange right? And he was living a quiet life in Salisbury, where, for whatever reason, he got taken out, or nearly taken out, with a Novichok bullet, perhaps. So, but Victor Rothschild is an interesting man because I don't think we talked about this at the last time, but in World War II, the British were suffering because they'd invented a lot of very powerful systems, including the cavity magnetron, the proximity fuse, the home chain early warning system of a fighter attack, but their production facilities were being bombed to hell by the German Luftwaffe. Right, so they had a problem. They had some bright technologies, but they didn't have the production capability. So a man called Henry Tizard was the sort of chief scientist for Churchill, together with Victor Rothschild. They decided that they would take their smart ideas to the United States and see if they could do a trade where they would provide the Americans with the technology and the inventions, and the Americans would provide the production to the British to prosecute the war in Europe. So Mr. Tizard, and I know the man's son, he took a trunk load of paperwork and a cavity magnetron out to Washington, and he met with all the senior military people in the United States, and they were blown away by, for example, the details of the proximity fuse and the cavity magnetron and identification and friend or foe technology. And finally, they agreed that they would produce these devices. But I don't think the Americans really understood that they got, how shall I put it, double-crossed. Because it turns out, for example, the cavity magnetron that was considered to have won the Battle of the Atlantic, because with the cavity magnetron, you could have a plane a mile away from a point in the ocean where a German submarine would raise its periscope, and they could pick it up with the cavity magnetron and then bomb it and destroy the submarine. Now, wouldn't that be interesting? This was 1940. The Tizard mission came to Washington. Wouldn't it be interesting if the design of the cavity magnetron ended up in the hands of the Imperial Japanese Navy, which they could then use for the Pearl Harbor attack?
Right.
So my research indicates that that's exactly what happened, that Victor Rothschild, he visited the Birmingham University where the cavity magnetron had been invented, and I forget the name of the professor, it's easy enough to find. What Rothschild did is he picked up a cavity magnetron and he took it away. And 48 hours later, he returned it with a note to the professor, you better be more careful with your security. But in 48 hours, he could very well have copied, photographed, and got all the details of this cavity magnetron and sent them off to a friend of his by the name of Lord Arthur Sempill in Tokyo, who was a treasonous Scot who had actually funneled all of the technologies developed by the Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy, to the Japanese, it would appear, in advance of the Pearl Harbor attack. So Pearl Harbor, I'm saying, or suggesting, the people behind the Pearl Harbor attack are the same people behind the attack of 9/11.
Oh, my goodness. There's a major conspiracy that has been perpetuated through the media for decades that President, Roosevelt knew in advance that we would be attacked. I don't know how true that is, but I wanted to get your intake on that, your perspective. Explain to us: did President Roosevelt know about the attack? Number one, and if he did, to what purpose would it benefit the United States if we would allow attack to take place?
Well, that period. Great question, Bishop. That period, many Americans didn't want to get into the Second World War, right? Now, there may have been a moral argument for getting into it, but many Americans didn't. And the Germans had a very effective spy network in the United States to persuade them not to. Right? So what Churchill needed to do was to find a cause célèbre, if you will, that would get America into the war. Now, I'm very confident. Well, first of all, Lord Mountbatten came out to Pearl Harbor in April of 1941, and it would appear his job was to case the weaknesses of the American defenses against an attack such as the one that was going to come from the Japanese. I think it was November the 23rd, was it? November the 23rd?
Yes, sir.
The attack took place. Anyway, Mountbatten goes back to the UK, and I believe by then he's identified what the weaknesses of the American defenses were, including the Americans had a less effective defense against a surprise airborne attack than the British, because by then, 1941, the British had developed what they called the low home chain, which was using a combination of radar and radio to identify the German Air Force as they assembled over France before attacking the United Kingdom. And they were able to deploy fighters to the point when the Germans posed a threat that was way in advance of what was available to the Americans, unless they had immediately incorporated the techniques that brought by Henry Tizard in 1940. So the British knew what the weaknesses were in the area around Pearl Harbor. They also knew that Lord Arthur Semple, I believe British intelligence, was in Japan helping or coaching the Imperial Japanese Navy to build things like aircraft carriers. You may or may not know that the first aircraft carrier was the Her Majesty's ship Argus that was commissioned in 1917. And on the deck, there are some photographs, if you look. There are Sopwith Camel torpedo bombers, and they could take off from this thing, and then they had to land on shore because the aircraft carrier was not equipped for takeoff and landing. But nonetheless, it was a fully fledged aircraft carrier, the first in the world. It turns out that N.M. Rothschild and HSBC funded both sides of the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. So those two banks, both of them are shareholders in Serco, funded the first major dreadnought warfare between two sovereign states, because again, and I'm not bad-mouthing my countrymen, the British are very good at getting two countries that might pose a threat to Britain to fight each other, right? And it appears that N.M. Rothschild and HSBC funded the rearmament of Japan after the 1904 Russo-Japanese War, providing them with enough money through bonds to build the aircraft carriers used against Pearl Harbor. It gets even more exciting because I did a patent check, on what happened to the cavity magnetron that was taken out by Henry Tizard in the mission of 1940 to Washington. And incidentally, I understand that by the end of the war, the Americans were producing about 1 million, or had produced about 1 million cavity magnetrons. So the take-up in production was just astonishing. But anyway, I discovered, and you can Google that, that the patent owner or the patent assignee for the cavity magnetron patented in the United States in 1940 was Radio Corporation of America, RCA. And RCA started a subsidiary in the United Kingdom in 1929 called RCA GB 1929. So in 1940, RCA has the cavity magnetron patent, and RCA GB 1929 in 1988 becomes Serco. So it stays in the family, Bishop, right? These companies, or Serco, formerly RCA, and N.M. Rothschild, have controlled the American and the British patent pool, I would argue, since 1802. Over to you.
Wow. Did the British, I think we had talked about this before, some broadcasts back, that the like 5,000 U.S. patents were stolen by the British. Am I correct in saying that, sir?
Well, that's fascinating, because in 1811, or was it 12, the British attacked Washington, and they burnt all of the government buildings to the ground with the exception of one building, which was the patent office. And the reason they didn't burn the patent office down was Dr. William Thornton, the Anglo-American, said, "The United States Patent Office is a gift to humanity. Leave it alone." Right? In 1836, the United States Patent Office in Blodgett's Hotel, the building for the United States Post Office, was burnt to the ground. And by then, I'm estimating they had 10,000 of the first patents in the United States. Now, from the point of view of the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom, wouldn't it be nice if you could pick up 10,000 patents without paying anyone for it? So I think before burning down the United States Patent Office in 1836, the British carted off all the documentation. It's a bit like the Tizard mission in reverse. They steal all of the models and the designs and take them back to the United Kingdom to fuel the Industrial Revolution.
Man, this is wicked. This is wicked. And we have with this David Hawkins as we are matriculating into part 6 of the greatest conspiracy ever told here with not just a guest anymore. He's a part of the Global Spiritual Revolution family, and that is Mr. David Hawkins. Continue to send in your questions to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, that's Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. This death peasant insurance. I've read something today, David, and I'll definitely email this to you, that the top insurance companies in the United States are still using this death peasant insurance. Haven Life, Mass Mutual, Banner Life, Protective Life, Prudential, AIG, the Principal Insurance Company, Northwestern Mutual, MetLife, including the Transamerica Insurance Company. In number one on the list as far as the largest insurance company in the world that is still using a death peasant insurance is this Berkshire Hathaway company that's headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, and including AIG, AXA, which is an insurance company out of Paris, France, the Allianz insurance company there in Germany, so forth and so on, including the HSBC that you may mention, Fannie Mae, BNP Paribas out of France, and including money being funneled through the Bank of China. So this, explain to our listeners, what is death peasant insurance? When did it start? Who started this in history? And why is it so profitable for corporations to do this? And is it legal from your perspective? Over to you.
Well, of course, they don't call it dead peasant life insurance. They describe it as corporate-owned life insurance or something like that. Now, if I'm a company with a lot of high-tech involvement and I have a few key men or key women, it becomes, if they die or they have an accident, I could actually shut down because they're so central to the technological development of, the system. So Steve Jobs and Apple, et cetera, if he went early on in his career, Apple probably wouldn't be where it is now. So it's perfectly legitimate for a corporation to insure its key personnel. Where it gets a little murky is if they start insuring down into the engine room or the janitors. Some people actually call it janitor life insurance, where every janitor, bless them, can be replaced, right? You don't need to insure them. And where you get into the moral hazard, it may be quite profitable for a corporation to insure, let's say, its peasants or its janitors, and then arrange to have them killed, right, by going out and looking for a special ops people or a SWAT team. And that's the fascinating thing about Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, because she formed this JPATS, or Justice, Prisoner, and Alien Transportation System, nicknamed Con Air. And with Con Air, she could fly a hit team or a SWAT team from a jail in, I don't know, Arkansas into New York the night before 9/11 and equip them in the Pentagon City Sheraton Hotel with FBI T-shirts and tell them immediately there's an attack. They don't need to know exactly who's behind the attack or what it is, but they're told as soon as the Wedge 1 of the Pentagon is blown up, right, we want you down on the Pentagon lawn picking up evidence, right? So you can see a video of people lying abreast with someone behind them wearing a sort of wireless headphones, and they're picking up evidence on the morning of 9/11, 10 minutes after impact, before the lintel of Wedge 1 has collapsed. So I'm saying to myself, well, where did these guys come from, right? They're wearing FBI shirts, as far as I can make out. Technically, you know what they're doing? They're spoliating evidence, which is a felony. It's 5 years in jail. And they're easily recognizable. But your question is about life insurance. Well, anyone can insure anyone else. So let's say one of these insurance companies decided that insuring the staff working in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center against an attack on 9/11, if it did occur and 100 people died, it might bust the insurance company. So they could engage in what is known as catastrophe bond insurance. They put a certain amount of money to sponsor the bond, and investors are told, well, there's no chance that 120 people in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center are going to die. Why don't you put in $1 billion, and you can pick up $100 million if they don't? Well, on 9/11, 125 people in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center were killed, probably by a Lockheed Martin penetrator missile that went right through the building, came into the inner courtyard, and someone in the deep state or the shadows of the insurance company picked up a great deal of money. Now, you just mentioned that AXA, the French company, is one of those insurance people. Well, AXA Equitable invented, or were the first people, as I understand it, to sell dead peasant life insurance to the Tsar's family in Russia. And the argument is the Tsar would buy life insurance on peasants, but they were already dead. Didn't put in the claim.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
So fast forward. Now, AXA Equitable Life was paying out insurance for dead peasants, including the people in Cantor Fitzgerald at the top of the North Tower. When Howard Lutnick, the inventor of that convenience wagering system which uses the wireless radio, he could have been, and I believe he was, actually involved in real-time interactive wagering on dead peasants, including his own brother and 657 of his colleagues who died at the top of the north face of the North Tower. So you have a massive, massive conspiracy. I think it's quite well described. I'd be delighted to hear what you think, with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is a group of patents: Boeing, Conair, Lutnick, and Dum Dum. And with those four horsemen around the world, they're here today, Bishop, and that's why I'm introducing this project for the networking injured community equity, because I believe we are now in a position, hopefully, and it would be a great privilege to work with people like you, where we alert the injured community in New York, which could be the firefighters or the New York police, or the people who were killed by the impact of the penetrator bomb, or the passengers and pilot and crew of American Flight 11, we alert them to say, the show's over. You now have a legal remedy, first of all, in the court of public opinion, which is the kind of court that you deal with, where we don't go into a regular court until we have our ducks in a row. We educate the public at large. This is what happened on 9/11. Forget about whether it is the Pope or the Jesuits or the Illuminati or Mossad or whatever. First of all, the analysis has to be, what were the weapons that were used and how were they used? And that leads to who had custody of those weapons on the morning of 9/11, and that inevitably ends up with Serco and Rothschild, and then you sue the hell out of Serco and Rothschild.
Yes. Wow.
Right? Now, how deep are Serco's... Sorry.
Go ahead. Oof.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, David.
How deep are Serco's pockets? Well, Serco, at its shareholders' meeting on the 47th floor, has 10 global custodians, including BNY Mellon and Northern Trust of Chicago, which was the alien property custodian in World War I and World War II, and probably to this day. They have $100 trillion of assets under management, and I think there's enough there for your Lamborghini, Bishop.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. And this again, this is one of the most mind-blowing interviews I've done in many years here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio concerning this insurance company, AXA, and peasant insurance, especially on this article. I had no idea. This is mind-blowing. 929-477-3997. And also to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, the Geico Insurance Company still is a proponent of dead peasant insurance. They don't call it dead peasant insurance, but it's amazing that one of their main sayings every time you watch a Geico commercial, you'll save more money when it comes to Geico. But they're perpetuating. They're one of these insurance companies that are proponents of this death peasant insurance company. In connection with that, I had heard from another guest that we had on not too long ago that the creation of the birth certificate was actually created by the Vatican, going back as far as the late 1800s, where the Vatican created what they called a royal trust, using the birth certificate to capture the value of each individual's future productive energy. Where each state, province, and country in the fiat monetary system would be actually slaves to the Vatican, where also this is where we get the Social Security number, the SIN number, the EIN number. What say you concerning the history of the birth certificate as we're talking about the greatest conspiracy ever told, and what is the Vatican tied to the birth certificate and including this dead peasant insurance? Over to you.
Well, these are difficult questions, you see, because I believe my role at Able Danger as a forensic economist is to focus on the actus reus, the facts of the case.
Yes.
The other component of any successful criminal prosecution is what's known as mens rea, the guilty mind. That is to say, you don't get a conviction of guilt unless the perpetrator that has done something that resulted in the death of someone can show a conscious willingness or wish to kill the victim. Right? Now, I get constantly pulled in different directions. I'm told it's the Pope, it's the Illuminati, it's the Mossad, it's whatever, it's the Jews, and so on. And I'm saying, look, everyone has a tendency to blame their favorite group against which they have a grievance for whatever reason, whether it's cultural or historic or whatever. And I'm saying, well, my job as an engineer, and I do in my bio talk about my performance in thermodynamics back in a long, long time ago, where I've described thermodynamics as the science of hot air, waste, and chaos. Well, that's a great metaphor for these people who would like to tell us that it's the Jews that did it, or the Pope that did it, or the Vatican did it, or the Queen did it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm looking at, if you take the Queen, for example, she's, 94? I mean, I'm 74. I have trouble with this modern technology. I mean, she was born a generation before me. In the case of the Queen, or the British monarchy, she has no power other than she has the absolute right to be informed, to advise, and to consent, right? Which is a very interesting situation because, i.e., she's got considerably less power than Barack Hussein Obama, who rewrote the law, just like Bill Clinton. And your constitution is rapidly going out of the window, as far as I can see, in the United States, because the regulating authorities have been compromised. For example, I discovered years ago that the Marine Corps Camp Pendleton, the Marine Corps base in Camp Pendleton, they've imported digital fires instructors from Serco. So Serco is teaching the Marines how to recognize an enemy, which begs the question, well, whose enemy is it? Is it Serco's enemy? Is the truth the enemy of these people? Right? So, your question was, could the Vatican have done it? Well, quite possibly the Vatican might have been responsible for something if you go back far enough. But what I'm interested in is in 1802, the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office was an Anglo-American who happened to design the Capitol building. His name was Dr. William Thornton. In 1811, James Hall comes to see him and says, "Can I patent my rifle?" And Thornton says, "No, it's already been patented, but if you add my name to the patent, I'll grant it."
Right?
So
Wow.
there I'm saying, okay, so the British got a foot in the door with the U.S. Patent Office in 1811. That was the year N.M. Rothschild was formed in London. Fast forward to 1836, I think the British burnt down the United States Patent Office, took 10,000 patents back to the UK because they would have understood if you control a country's patent pool, you control the country.
Wow. Again, and it seems like not to bash my British brothers and sisters there in England and within the UK, but it seems like the power base, the history of this world power, the British Empire, was built not just on politics and blood, but deception and manipulation, fraud, and piracy. Am I correct in saying that, David?
Yeah, unfortunately, my ancestor, Sir John Hawkins, was a privateer. Actually, that's an upmarket form of pirate.
Wow.
So he would steal bullion from the French and the Portuguese, but because he split it with Queen Elizabeth I, he wasn't considered to be a pirate. So, if you're a social climber and you don't want to be recognized as a pirate, you've got to split the money with the government, right? Well, what happens to the Clintons, right? The Clintons split their money, the foundation, with the government, and I would describe then, I wouldn't give them the grade of privateers. They're basically pirates.
Yeah, and it's amazing that Hillary Clinton, is using her mentors, and you talk about that AXA Corporation, that Hillary Clinton is a Circle shareholder, and she had, through AXA, had set up this dead peasant fraud schemes where union scabs in Circle supply chains would be targeted, and again, not to get away from what we're talking about, this Hillary Clinton, and it seems like this woman has her claws in every facet of American society. And am I correct in saying this, David?
Well, that's a very interesting point. When she was intellectual property lawyer at Rose Law in Little Rock, one of her clients was BEI Industries, which had a patent for the QRS-11, the quartz rate sensor gyrochip, which is the device that is used for guidance and controls in Maverick missiles, and also in the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. So she brokered, or at least if I go back to my suggestion that the four horsemen of the apocalypse are the four patent families that were released on 9/11 for the first time in a coordinated way, then Hillary Clinton would have brokered the integration of the gyrochip into the Boeing aircraft fleet, including the Conair fleet of Boeing aircraft, such that any one of those planes could be taken from a simulation attack to a live fire attack. And I think on 9/11, you probably had in the skies above America about 100 narrow-bodied Boeing aircraft that had been modified so that they could be switched between decoy and drone and flown remotely through the AWACS system. And they decided I mean, what they were hoping to do is synchronize the attack in New York so that one plane would hit the north face of the North Tower at the same time, Bishop, as another plane hit the south face of the South Tower. Now, think of the impact of that. And in Washington, the idea was that they would take out the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center at the same time as the Capitol building, where there was a meeting of the Joint House, which would have killed 535 congressmen and senators and decapitated America. What saved your bacon, so to speak, or the Republic, I believe, was someone, and I think I know who that was able to impute a 41-minute delay in Flight 93, which crashed allegedly in a field outside Shanksville. But Field McConnell and myself believe all of those hijacked aircraft were used as decoys. They were flown out over the Atlantic and dumped in a drop zone, all right? And the debris was picked up by an aircraft carrier, believing it was part of an exercise, so the crew would have been sworn to silence. And they released 4 drones, and what you see in the field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is a droned aircraft with no passengers.
Wow. Man, David, getting deeper into, as we're talking about the greatest conspiracy ever told, Part 6, do you believe that there were more planes involved in 9/11, but we have never been told the totality of the truth of what happened that day? I mean, you're talking about the 2 planes hitting the World Trade Towers, one hitting the Pentagon supposedly, which I don't believe it was a plane, then one going into that Shanksville, Pennsylvania farmland. Do you believe that there was actually more planes involved, but because of national security and the government didn't want to bring about a national panic within upon the American people, do you believe that there were more planes involved that we don't even know about?
Absolutely, and the reason that they didn't proceed ultimately with the attempt at overthrowing the government was because some of those planes left late, and the route that they had been given to fly was not compensated in time. So I think it was Flight 11, American 11, hit the north face of the North Tower, and United 175 hit the south face of the South Tower. But United 175 left 16 minutes late, and they didn't adjust the trajectory of United. So it hit 16 minutes after the north face of the North Tower was hit by American Airlines. Had they made that correction, and it would have been easy using this AWACS technology that I've been talking about with the training system that can switch from simulation to mode, then Flight 175 would have hit the south face of the South Tower at the same time as the other plane had hit the north face of the North Tower. And this is what you call shock and awe. The American people would just not have been able to digest that. That's J. Edgar Hoover. He said the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. And that preamble to your show today about the red pill, and we'll show how how deep the rabbit hole is. I think what you and I have done today is maybe we've shown the public, your public, my public, our public, the world's public, how deep the rabbit hole goes. I mean, that is to say, we've shown them the red pill.
Yes. And this blue pill, and it seems like those people who have a blue pill mentality, they would do anything, even to the point of murder, of keeping their power. And you're talking about the deep state, this blue pill psychology. But a few of us, like you and myself, who are carriers of the red pill, we have to continue exposing this cabal. I mean, and again, that statement that you made mention, can you quote that again? That you may mention, I think it was Hoover or somebody else, about this conspiracy so vast and that the human mind could not comprehend it.
So J. Edgar Hoover said the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. So I spent my time,
David,
I got a fairly, and it's interesting because now you have to start thinking, what kind of conspiracy would he, with the FBI, would he know about? Well, I think the conspiracy, and again, it's a theory, why not a conspiracy to entrap people in those oath-taking rituals up at the pig farm, where they fly to the pig farm on Conair, which is Christine Mars's plane, as guests of the Ottawa Society, registered as Piggy Palace Good Time Society, registered by the Canadian federal government in 1996, where the trustees of that society were allowed to hold events, sporting and entertainment events, out at the pig farm, where women were being taken from the downtown east side, taken out to the pig farm, put up on a stage in front of 1,700 people, and I believe shot with a dum-dum bullet, right? And they took bets on how long that woman would take to die. Now, that to me is a conspiracy so monstrous, I can quite understand the average individual couldn't believe it exists.
David, this is mind-boggling, and you are such a gift to the world, because this, again, this knowledge, and I feel in my spirit people are being liberated as we speak, and I believe that God is using you, has anointed you and raised you up for such a time as this. We have with us world-renowned global forensic economist, the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins. Sir David Hawkins here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Before we get back into the greatest conspiracy ever told, and specifically getting into this networking injured the community equity in the Rothschilds North Tower Horsemen. I want to get deeper into that. From your perspective, is the deep state controlling President Trump, or is he controlling the deep state? What is the status of President Trump? Not to get away from the topic, but it seems like President Trump, he's not afraid of the deep state. Over to you.
Well, this is very interesting because a few days, maybe it was hours after the attack in New York, President Trump is being interviewed by a talk show host. And Trump is talking about a tour he did of the attack of the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. And he said, I went down into the basement of the World Trade Center, and there were complete columns knocked out. And he went there with the designer or the chief engineer who had built the World Trade Center back in, the 60s or 70s. And Trump had said this was an incredibly strong building because it was able to survive even though some of the central columns had been knocked out. And the reason he gave was that the external exoskeleton of the towers were basically iron girders about 4 or 5 feet apart all the way around the building like a cage.
Right.
And so it was built to withstand, a Boeing 747 or whatever hitting it, and to withstand the tremendous buffeting of the wind. 120-mile-an-hour wind on a rectangular surface is going to push the thing sideways. He said it's a very strong building. There had to have been explosives used to bring it down, in his opinion. Right? Now, that is back in 9/11. So Trump believes they used explosives to build those buildings, and he said he's going to clean the swamp. And he needs to issue a re-examination of all of the evidence of 9/11 because I think it would lead to an area which includes his investment banker, N.M. Rothschild.
Right.
But let me just go on here because I think your show, for me, it's extremely symbolic because I believe that the bulk of your listeners, not necessarily so, might be black. And other talk shows in New York, like Jason Goodman, might be Jewish or white. I don't know.
Yes.
And the point that I want to make to black people and Jewish people and white people, they don't care what color you are, right? They want to drive a wedge in between the blacks and the whites, and there's a particular clip, and I'm sure you can show that to your friends, and maybe after the show, of some firefighters that came out of the World Trade Center, and there's a black guy and a white guy.
Yeah.
And they said, and the camera is trained on, there were explosives in that building. Right?
Wow.
And I'm saying, why? Here you have two expert witnesses who were blown out of the building, who heard explosives. They're firefighters. Why hasn't the media interviewed them? Right? And they actually give their names. And I'm thinking in my dreams, well, if we want to set up a networked injured community equity, incidentally, the acronym is NICE. So Able Danger or Global Spiritual Radio Revolution can talk nice, right? Able Danger can talk nice, because what we're saying is to the injured community, which might be the firefighters or the police or the crew and the passengers on American 11, you are an injured community. We believe that you have your family or your relatives on those planes or inside that building suffered wrongful deaths as a result of the negligent or reckless use of patented devices. So we're going to sue or help you sue or develop an argument in the court of public opinion on how you might sue the custodians of those patented devices, which is Serco and NM Rothschild. And they've got deep pockets, like $100 trillion. So there's plenty of Lamborghinis to go around.
Man. Right. We're with this Mr. David Hawkins of Able Danger, and continue to send in your emails right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, quickly, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. The greatest conspiracy ever told, Part 6, with world-renowned global forensic economist, the Honorable Mr. Sir David Hawkins. Again, let's get deeper into this brief 289. Explain to us, David, concerning this equity. I mean, explain that to us, because, again, not to get away from what we're talking about, the greatest conspiracy ever told, but let's get deeper. Serco's connection to this Con Air SWAT teams and also to Boeing, but this equity, and we're talking about these insurance schemes and frauds throughout, not just throughout the United States, but throughout the world, a.k.a. Walmart with this dead peasant conspiracy. Explain to us, to our listeners, concerning this equity firm and the conspiracy behind that.
Okay, so equity, I don't know people familiar with raising working capital for a business. Generally, there's three kinds of capital raised as working capital. There's equity investors, where investors invest money into the company, which they have to be ready to lose if the company goes bankrupt. There's retained profits by that company. So as it goes through in its cash flow, eventually, hopefully, the company starts selling more than its, the expenses, and it makes a profit. Yeah. And until that's distributed, and it may actually be held within the company, that contributes to the working capital, retained capital. There's one other source of working capital, which is the money you borrow from the bank. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong, but very prudently, when I started my artificial intelligence development company in the UK, I decided I would only work with investors. I told them, you can invest in this and you may lose all your money, but I'm not going to go to the banks and borrow money, because there you have what's known as leverage. That is to say, the bank might decide that you've violated your loan covenant and shut you down and pick up all your assets. Not necessarily so, but this is called loan sharking, or can be called loan sharking. And I'm very confident that the capital raised by Donald Trump, particularly in the finance of Trump Shuttle Inc., was provided through a loan sharking arrangement by Citigroup. So Citigroup lent him $380 million, probably in a loan arranged by NM Rothschild. And yet, I think you said earlier, did I think the deep state controls Donald Trump, or Trump controls the deep state? I'm saying absolutely the deep state controls Donald Trump, right? Now, does that mean that Donald Trump might see the light and have the courage? That's my prayer, because I don't see anyone else in town. For example, the deep state totally controls Hillary Clinton and the Clintons,
Yes.
both through blackmail and entrapment and the money that's been laundered through the Clinton Foundation. What I'm intrigued by is Donald Trump's ego, right? That is to say, he might just prefer to be the greatest president that America ever had than be a puppet of the deep state.
Right.
I don't know which way he's going to jump, but I do believe right now, just in terms of he never has introduced or reopened the 911 investigation, which is shot through the holes. He hasn't done that yet. I don't think he's drained the swamp. I think he's finding the transfer of Wilbur Ross, right, who is a founder, member of the Kappa Beta Phi fraternity, which are the cross-dressing guys, the billionaires on Wall Street, right? That's the flip side of Phi Beta Kappa, which is the fraternity that has amongst its members George Bush Sr. and Clinton. Both of those secret societies were founded in 1776. But I guess I'm digressing. What I'd like to see or like to think is that Donald Trump brought Wilbur Ross into the cabinet as Commerce Secretary on the basis that keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yes. Wow. And explain, again, you hit another nerve with me concerning Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi. What is the distinction between Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi? Who is the Wall Street arm? Who are the intellectuals? What are they in Phi Beta Kappa or Kappa Beta Phi? Break these two secret society organizations down for us, David.
Yes. So Kappa Beta Phi and Phi Beta Kappa were formed in 1776. I believe British intelligence formed those two secret societies in order to control the United States after the War of Independence. Can't prove that yet, but I hope to one day. Phi Beta Kappa is the intellectual elite, and they have, let's say, 17 or 18 United States presidents, 30 Supreme Court judges over the periods in 1776, and 120 Nobel Prize winners. Right? So that's the intellectual elite. The other side are the hard-drinking, wenching, if you know what I mean, bully boys and bankers and billionaires. And there's only one chapter of Kappa Beta Phi left, and that's the Wall Street chapter that was formed, interestingly enough, in 1929, which is the year that RCA, the Radio Patent Monopoly Company, started its wholly owned subsidiary in the United Kingdom called RCAGB 1929, which would become Serco. And I think it's no coincidence. If you control the patent office, you can be a billionaire. So there's only one chapter left. It's the Wall Street chapter, and they have the disgraceful ceremony. They do cross-dressing. They beat up on different ethnic groups, homosexuals, etc., etc. They're a pretty appalling bunch. But some of them, including, for example, let's say, is it Bezos, is worth $100 billion. Right?
Wow.
Now, I believe a very substantial part of the wealth comes from manipulation of the patented devices that give them the ability to kill at will, run a attack on Syria or Iraq or Iran, or even the attacks of 911, where through online gaming you could gamble on people's deaths, or the catastrophe bonds, when the two towers came down on the same day.
Yes. Man, and this is interesting. Again, you hit a nerve with me concerning not just Phi Beta Kappa, but this Kappa Beta Phi being the Wall Street section, the Wall Street side of Kappa Beta Phi. You got, major billionaires that I'm reading a list. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, and David Kamansky, former CEO of Merrill Lynch, Sally Krawcheck, former head of Citigroup, which brings me to my next question. I've been getting a multiplicity of emails, David, concerning the 1929 stock market crash. Was it done on purpose by the bankers? I'm talking about not just J.P. Morgan, the Merrill Lynch's, but on a higher level, like the Rothschilds and the Warburgs. Was the 1929 stock market crash here in the United States done purposely, allowed to? And then if it was done purposely, what was the end game of the global elite to bring about such a catastrophe within the United States?
Well, an excellent question, Bishop. And I think what happens there is if you have patents on the inside communication systems, right, that the general market and the shareholders doesn't have, it means you can take a short position in a company before crashing it, or a long position before giving it a major contract to rebuild, I don't know, the district early warning system or the ballistic missile early warning system. Incidentally, the DEWs and the BMUs were both built by RCA. Right? So huge contracts went towards Radio Corporation of America, which was in, I believe, it had its offices in the Rockefeller Center, where William Stevenson, the man Churchill called Intrepid, who was in charge of Allied spying activities during World War II, that's where he set up his office. And I'm quite sure he was responsible for the planning of the Pearl Harbor attack because he had access to the patent device. So your question is, was that an accident or a design? I think those kind of stock market crashes are engineered from within with people who have patents on the internal communications that is fed through these companies like, I don't know, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, that would allow you to take a position, for example, on 911, which would be long on the companies that are going to get the big contracts for the military technologies that are going to try and anticipate the next terrorist attack, and short on airlines that are going to have catastrophic loss in bookings because people are scared of flying. So it's what you call a pump and dump fraud by insiders, and there are no coincidences.
This is evil, and you look at not just after 9/11, there were some of the military industrial complex made a killing on Wall Street. You know, talking about Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. They made a huge killing on the day after 9/11, and so it is concerning the 1929 stock market crash that J.P. Morgan, David Rockefeller, they made a killing, and it seems like these people do not care about human life because they see you and I, David, as nothing more than peasants.
Correct.
Over to you.
And they don't care whether you're black or yellow or white or brown or whatever, right? They don't care whether you're Jewish or Christian or animist or Hindu or Muslim, right? It's basically sex, fear, greed, and power. They're the basic levers, and they haven't changed for 2,000 years.
Wow. What is the meaning as we're coming in here tonight? I wish we can keep you here for a couple more hours, but you talk about circles, AWACS, Con Air SWAT. What does the term AWACS, what does that mean?
Airborne Warning and Control System. And it really comes out of developments by the British in World War II, where they built the home chain, which were radar systems along the coast facing Germany, to give early warning of the Luftwaffe bombing heading towards the United Kingdom. And those technologies, many of those technologies, were transferred in the Tizard mission to the United States of September 1940, including one example of the first 12 cavity magnetrons. And what I noticed in my patent search is someone in the United States thought it would be a good idea, before handing the magnetron over to Americans for the ramped up production, to take out a patent on it. And I believe the British said, hey, why don't we give the Americans the cavity magnetron and they can start producing them in hundreds of thousands, but we'll control the cavity magnetron through a patent taken out by RCA. Right?
Wow.
And so what I'm saying is during World War II, essentially they integrated American production with British patents and technology, and
Yes.
right forward through to the present day, largely helped by Victor Rothschild, right, the former chairman of NM Rothschild and Son, and I believe two very senior military generals who I think we'll prove one day were traitors. One was General Alexander Haig, who was the former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and I believe he built a back door into the AWAC system for Serco and NM Rothschilds to hack into the American Republic on 9/11, because after all, General Alexander Haig said 14 minutes after first impact, we know where to look, it's the Palestinians or the Bin Laden group. Well, how would he know that unless he'd been rehearsing it in advance? Right? The other general was the son of a Waffen SS major in the Second World War. His name is General John Shalikashvili. He's dead now.
Yes.
He was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was sent by a treasonous president of the United States, which I believe is Bill Clinton, to Beijing to give a talk to the People's Liberation Army. And if Americans think that China is a friend, you're dreaming. China is getting ready for World War III, right? But let's say
they are.
What Shalikashvili said in his presentation to the People's Liberation Army generals at the University of Beijing. He said, "My president, this is 1997, has given me orders to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs." Right? So the attack of 9/11 included a number of Chinese factions or organizations, together with domestic traitors, who had custody of the patented devices that caused the wrongful death of significant number of injured community in the United States. So let's sue the hell out of them.
Yes. Wow. And in our remaining minutes, and we have with us Mr. David Hawkins, global forensic economist, The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 6 here, and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. I had read something today, David, in our remaining minutes, that there are at least 7 countries, maybe a little more, but 7 countries concerning Iceland that are not allowing any Rothschild banks into their countries. Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Cuba, North Korea, and Iceland. The president of Iceland some years ago had kicked out the Rothschilds, and I think other European countries are doing the same. And so could it be that, do you think that the generals, the military-industrial complex, are trying to sucker the President Trump, into a war, to create a World War III catastrophe by attacking North Korea? Because North Korea is on this list of 7, 8 countries that do not have a Rothschild bank. And it seems like, and it's my prayer, that President Trump is not suckered into another Bay of Pigs like President Kennedy. Over to you, David.
Yeah, well, you see, Rothschild is, I think they're very smart. Going back to Victor Rothschild, he was a very capable chemist, a biologist, and explosive disposal expert. But you see, going back to that meeting on the 47th floor, I believe it was hosted by Rothschild, which is the investment banker for Serco. But amongst Serco's shareholders that would have been on that 47th floor are 10 global custodians. So these 7 countries that you mentioned that are keeping the Rothschilds out, they won't be able to keep the global custodians out, because the global custodians, you can think of Serco as a proxy for Rothschild. And Serco is the enforcer. It's got the ability to mobilize these Con Air SWAT teams. For example, Serco is the world's largest air traffic controller and one of the world's largest logistics provider for the prison industry, right? So it's actually operating prisons in a number of Five Eyes countries. Well, if you want a SWAT team, there's a film called The Dirty Dozen. You want a SWAT team to attack America on 9/11, why don't you go into one of these jails where you've got a whole bunch of totally vulnerable prisoners who can be drugged up, and you say, look, we got you on death row, but you can have a little fling and a little excitement. We'll fly you to New York. You can blow up a couple of buildings, and we'll have you back in jail for dinner. right? So I
Wow.
believe the one airline that violated all of those clear the skies orders that I believe came from Norman Mineta and his friends was Christine Marcy Field's sister's Conair. She continued to fly
Right.
people around the United States after 9/11, and she appears to have flown members of the bin Laden family out of the country on Conair.
Wow.
She founded that Conair. I don't know why that woman is not behind bars,
Oh, really?
but for the time being, she should be.
Wow. Very powerful woman. Wicked, but very powerful. The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 6. Maybe one more question or two more questions, but it seems like also, not to go all over the map, what we're talking about here tonight, The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 6, but the Rothschilds being kicked out of some of these countries. 2 years ago, in 2016, the government of Hungary kicked out the Rothschild IMF Bank. That was huge. I mean, I'm shocked that the president of Hungary has not been assassinated, and now President Vladimir Putin is purging every banker who has been connected or interconnected with any Rothschild entity. And it seems like Putin doesn't care if he gets killed. Putin said, I'm not going to allow any foreign entity or any private banking system of the Rothschilds to control me. And this is the reason why they're trying to kill him, the deep state. What say you, David?
Well, again, I believe that Rothschild stays in the shadows and uses Serco's muscle as a proxy. So, for example, if you take that Sukhoi superjet that crashed in Mount Salak in Indonesia, that was on a test and demonstration flight, that was obviously skyjacked. Now, the world's leading company, air traffic controller, is Serco. It runs the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It would therefore have access to this AWACS training system that can switch from simulation to live fire and back again 3 times before breakfast, so it leaves no paper trail. And I would say that the first thing that is to be done by the Russians and the Americans and the Brits and the New Zealanders and the Australians is to strip Serco out of any contract and shut it down, right? And leave its shareholders and global custodians available for us to sue using networked injured community equity. And the idea of that, you see, is, Bishop, is I look at the 9/11 attack, and there were a number of discrete communities that were singled out by the perpetrators for different kinds of patented devices. So, for example, the people who died on the impact of the first thing that hit the the north face of the North Tower, died as a result of the release of a Lockheed Martin penetrator missile that went right through the building. So they would have died through physical damages, probably from the fragmentation and explosion of the penetrator missile. The fire department of New York that were ambushed in the building, and their Motorola radios were jammed so they didn't get the order to evacuate, they died with a different set of patented devices, right? The people who were flown in American Flight 11 over the top of the Twin Towers and out into the Atlantic, they were hijacked through this Boeing system that switches from simulation to live mode. So if you see my drift, it's a different set of patents, and therefore the perpetrator is a different perpetrator. You even go to the extreme, they did, because they said that the Twin Towers fell through a double occurrence, and therefore Larry Silverstein was able to claim, or thought he might be able to claim, $3.2 billion for each building, right? Finally, they whittled it down through these fraudulent insurance companies, and I think he didn't make, but they made $1.4 billion profit on 9/11 for the Twin Towers leverage leases. But the leverage lease was organized by Wells Fargo and Citigroup. So Wells Fargo made the profit, not Larry Silverstein.
Yeah. Okay. So, because I know that they went to court some years ago, and they said Silverstein, like you said, he didn't get all of what he wanted, but he got partly. But I didn't know that money didn't go to him. Wow.
No, it's what you call it's a master servicer arrangement with a leverage lease, and people think that little Barry Sfotero is a nice guy. Well, in 1984, he worked for BIC in New York, which is, I think, British Invisibles Corporation. I think he's been an agent for the British from day one, and he specialized in writing up leveraged lease and currency swaps. So he very likely had a key role in the design of the leveraged lease arrangement for the Twin Towers when the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey sold the 99-year mortgage on the Twin Towers 6 weeks before they were demolished, right, to Larry Silverstein and Wells Fargo, right? And then they proceeded to arrange a phony insurance where they could claim double the money if both towers came down on the same day.
Goodness, wow! And they tried to do it back in 1993, the first time when Clinton was in office, and they didn't have enough bombings. They didn't. I mean, again, was MI6 the Mossad, including the Central Intelligence Agency? Were they working in conjunction to bring about a 9/11 attack? What say you, Dave?
In 1993. Well, the man who designed the bomb, the man who designed the bomb in 1993 is a guy called Ramzi Youssef, and he used 100 pounds of atomized aluminum powder. Right, he ended up in ADX Florence, the Supermax jail, right, in a cell adjacent to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Timothy McVeigh. And you know who put him in those in adjacent cells? Christine Marcy, Phil's sister. Right?
Wow. Man.
Senior counsel for the Marshal Service. So she flew them to ADX Florence. She flew evidence from the Murrah building down to Washington to the FBI lab, which is tainted by Robert Hansen. Right? She's up to it in her scrawny little neck. Oh, and incidentally, in 1984, with Eric Holder, they launched the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which is where you might lose your Lamborghini one day, right?
Yeah.
and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Those kids on the milk cartons that we've been seeing down through the years. Well, are you talking about Pizzagate? This, Trump is trying to clean up these pedophile gates, and like you said on the TV portion of our program back in January, it is high as it is deep. And in our conclusion here tonight, and we talked about those patents, the top 10 countries with the most patent grants are the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, the European Patent Office, including Russia, Canada, Australia, Germany, and France. We are looking forward to having David back next month. He's going to be with us each and every month as we continue this powerful intellectual series entitled The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told. And maybe next time I would love to get into some of the inventions that the United States government has that used to be controlled by the Nazis. I know I heard from a former guest or a past guest that the street cams were invented by the Nazis. I didn't know that the street cams and the surveillance system that the CIA has perfected, including MI6, was started by the Germans, and we definitely got to get into that next time. David, any lasting words that you want to leave with us tonight before we close out? Very interesting.
Oh, I'll just mention the Amerithrax attack after 9/11, where they distributed anthrax bacillus. That was the AIM strain from Porton Down in the United Kingdom, but it was sabotage with what's known as sabotage spore powder to increase the dispersivity so that it would trigger inhalation anthrax. And I've done a patent check on the sabotage spore powder, and it's probably made by and patented by Degussa through a technique called pyrotechnic or a pyrotechnic technique. And Degussa were the producers of the Zyklon gas used to gas the Jews and the homosexuals and the gypsies in the gas chambers of World War II. So Degussa would appear to have had a significant role in supplying the sabotage pour powder for the Amerithrax attack after 9/11. And Robert Mueller, bless his little soul, was supposed to send an FBI team to Portland down to see who had leaked, or appears to have leaked, the anthrax bacteria, and he never did. So I would say that you've got to look very carefully at the former Marine Corps guy, Robert Mueller. I think he's corrupt.
Oh, big time. And, he's wasting millions of dollars of tax-paying dollars over this Russia crap, and it's just wasting time. And President Trump is going to be reelected. The Democrats have no one that can really challenge President Trump, and then he'll get another 4 years. Remember also, you talk about some of these outbreaks. Remember back in 2003, the SARS outbreak in Toronto, Canada. And I read something recently that the term SARS also means Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. And back in 2003, the SARS outbreak started in Chinatown in Toronto, Canada. And rumor has it that President Bush, through the Central Intelligence Agency, just a rumor, I just believe in, like you said, sticking to the facts but not rumor, because Canada did not want to get involved in the Gulf War, in the war against Iraq and Afghanistan, that the SARS outbreak was planted. But it's interesting. What say you in our remaining minutes about the SARS outbreak?
Well, what I would do now after thinking about this hard is I would always look to see if there's a patent trail, where people are researching either the detoxification agent in the event of something like that outbreak, because realistically you can't test a detoxification agent until you have samples of things that you want to detoxify. And it's the custody of those things, like Northwestern University has stocks of Novichok to test its detoxification system that was granted a patent by the Defense Research Agency. So, I would just say get into the habit, or at least that's the habit that I've got into, is see if you can find a patent that explains the facts of the case, and then see who has custody of that patent, and do they have the opportunity to induce the SARS outbreak, and then I think you're getting very close to the perpetrators.
Man, this is so interesting. Mr. Hawkins, thank you so much for taking the time out of your business schedule to be back with us this evening on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. And give us the website to Able Danger right now in our remaining minutes.
Well, thank you very much. It's abledanger.org. That's as in Cain and Abel, ABEL, danger.org. And we have a Patreon button for people who'd like to sponsor the work we do. That would be very much appreciated. Yes. And hopefully we can work very closely with you in educating and alerting the public that they are under threat, it would appear, from the custodians of the United States Patent Office that may be the same custodians that took a position in the United States Patent Office back in 1800s. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Are you still on the air with us?
Yes, I'm still there.
Okay, we were cut off just for a second. Repeat what you just said.
Okay. Yes, we are at abledanger.org. That's Cain and Abel, ABEL danger.org, and we have a Patreon button for people who'd like to support our work, and any contributions would be greatly appreciated. And I'm hoping that your group and our group, we share a common interest, and we can start moving in on this networked injured community equity program.
Oh, this is awesome, and we are so very honored to have you, David. And Mr. David Hawkins will be back with us next month for part 7 of The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, for being with us, and we see you next month.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bishop, and it was a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. Thank you so much, my friend. And that was Mr. David Hawkins of AbleDanger.org, AbleDanger.org. And if you would like to bless Global Spiritual Revolution Radio in Media Group here in New York financially, we do need your finances to continue to propagate the truth, to shine the light in darkness, to awaken and unawaken global humanity. All you have to do is go on paypal.me/GSRR Media Group, paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. Let me say it again, paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. One more time, paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. When you give unto the Lord, He will give you more to give. We will see you on Thursday as we have back with us some of the most powerful apostles, bishops, and pastors within the present day body of Christ. We see you next time here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Good night from New York.
There is no spoon.
The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers! Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Requires new line. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 480p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers! Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Requires new line. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 480p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.